So to start off, how about you tell me a little bit about yourself and your interest in being interviewed for this piece on COVID-19 and sort of your general experience with COVID-19.
Well, I think I've had probably a similar experience to a lot of other people. I am someone who is a very part-time resident, and I am the best way to describe me is I am a permanent guest I'm a resident guest at the Waybury Inn. I am a resident guest at the Waybury Inn. It's my base of operations when I do my radio program, which focuses on food and wine and dining out. And the show is heard all over New England. And actually my home is in Rhode Island. Since I have affiliates all over the place, and since the nature of the show is what it is, and all dining out is local, I have to go where the food is. So I kind of divide my time, and one of the places that I spend a lot of time is in Vermont, and I base out of the Waybury Inn. I'm heard on 2 different radio stations in Vermont, one in Burlington and one in Bennington. And so the focus of the show is where to find dining and restaurants and food choices and things like that. And so you have to be kind of close to things. Now, as we're finding out, being associated in the restaurant business and a lot of other businesses, a pandemic will kind of get in the way of being able to be close to food or dining out or any of the things that we enjoyed or even pursued before March of 2020. So I was actually at the Waybury Inn when it all kind of went down the second week of March, and when our world just changed. And so what I've been able to do is to keep things going on a virtual level, and then I was able to return when things loosened up in the late summer and into the fall. And now I've had to go back to virtual with the restrictions that have been placed by the state of Vermont and all of the other states as well. So there's a lot to talk about, and there's a lot to there's a lot to think about, and particularly there's a lot to tell with regard to the management and the staff of the Waybury Inn and how it has become, it has been a beacon in the town and in the county for hundreds of years, literally. And I found out firsthand just what that meant to folks who live in the area and who really came and were able to not only take advantage of what the Waybury Inn was offering, but also to be able to show and to tell the folks who own and who operate the inn just what they meant, what that inn and those people meant to these folks in a time of unprecedented difficulty for them.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting because I'm from Middlebury. I'm a student of Middlebury College, and the Waybury Inn is certainly a place that I've patronized for a long time. And when you go up to the mountain during the winter, you see all the out-of-state cars, that are there eating dinner, sleeping at the inn to go ski the Middlebury College Snow Bowl the next day. And I think sort of it brings into perspective, this importance of gathering around food and how the pandemic has sort of changed that. And it's very interesting to hear you talk about sort of how the Waybury has served as your home base, and how you've been able to sort of tell your story sort of in this setting of a small Vermont inn.
Well, I go back beyond this time. I mean, my family started vacationing in the area many years ago. So I go back at least 50 years or so beyond that. We used to stay at the same place on Lake Dunmore every summer. And so you get to know the area pretty well. And so I had a kind of tangential relationship with the inn. And then was able to kind of rekindle a lot of those ties when my show got picked up by the station in Burlington, WVMT. And so we sort of knew that we knew each other, but we didn't know that we knew each other. But I go back a lot further than just the present day.
Mhm.
And what's incredible is, like you say, you go by and you drive past on East Main and you're going up the mountain and you see all these people and they're traveling, having great times. It's so funny because every time I'm there, there's a Middlebury College event going on there. So there's a lot of people from the college who are there celebrating or just taking in the time, visiting their students, might be parents, family members, and so forth. But yet there's also, it's almost like there's two constituencies at the Waybury Inn. There's all of those people that you just described, right, from all the other states and all the Middlebury parents and families and all of the rest, and the proms and the celebrations and so forth. But then there's the local people who go there on a regular basis, who have dinner on Wednesday nights and who have dinner on Saturday nights, and it's a big night out for these folks. And magnify that 100-fold in what we've gone through in this pandemic. Because what we held dear, now we hold hundreds of times as dear. And that's the relationship. And it's surprising until you realize that it's not. And that's the real secret to how this inn has survived for 220 years, or 210 years, that that it has been a gathering place for the community for probably most of that time. And in fact, based on one event that I hope I get a chance to tell you about, some people really brought forward how long the inn has been a landmark and a beacon for the local people and people in the town and people in the county.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point in that sort of these places of gathering and places that are important for the community in the form of an inn, which in a New England town, an inn is essential to, or often, certainly back in back when before big hotels were a thing, people would go there and they would either, as you say, they vacation, they come up, or they would even go for a meal once a week, and that would be a very big deal and important for the community. I think during the pandemic, it's certainly been difficult, and I'm sure you can speak to this, where there were these restrictions, and it was a lot difficult for people to go and visit the inn, patronize these businesses, these restaurants, because of the restrictions and the health concerns with going to dine in at a restaurant.
Well, it's actually it's even more of a poignant story than that, and we found this out. The innkeeper, Joe Sutton, and his staff were going to have just a kind of a gathering, kind of a fall celebration, and it kind of turned into a thank you for the town and for the area. And it's interesting because it started out as one kind of an event, morphed into another, and then ended up the way that it was as a third kind of an event. It was a breakfast, and it was in October. It was a Columbus Day weekend, and it was a breakfast just for anybody that cared to come from the area, just to say, hey, thanks for patronizing the inn during these months, because we needed them, they needed us. But what it turned into was this love fest. It was a breakfast that turned into a love fest, because there was a group of folks, a group of people, probably 80 or so people, who turned out over the course of time, all socially distanced and all in keeping with all of the guidelines and so forth. But they all wanted to come to show their appreciation for how the inn had opened, remained opened, and had been a link to the old world back before March. And story after story after story of these folks who came and who started coming. For many, this was the first place that they had ventured out after they had been locked down. And it was months after the rest of us had kind of ventured out. In some cases, in fact, right around that time, maybe just before, just after, I happened to be sitting in the dining room, and at the next table was a couple, and you know how you kind of listen to table talk and so forth, and this couple is talking, and it was literally the first time they had been out since March.
Wow.
And this is where they went. So I mean, that in and of itself is a great story, but these folks wanted to come back at the breakfast. These people wanted to come and make their feelings known and to express their love for Joe and Tracy and all of the staff at the Waybury Inn, who had been working and keeping themselves safe, no outbreaks, no spread, and it was nothing short of remarkable. And it was just so poignant the way that one after another, this group of people would come up, would come. Some of them came to me because we were doing a podcast, a radio show, and they would talk to me on mic, but then they just wanted to talk to Joe, and they just wanted to tell him how they felt.
I think that's a wonderful story, and you know, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, and you know, restaurants were shutting down. It was really tough because you know, the people who own these restaurants and you know, own these inns are members of the community just like everybody else. And I think that, you know, hearing that from the Waybury and sort of the appreciation that was shown, you know, reflects the importance of community, especially in the face of a global pandemic, and sort of supporting those communities and showing that support by going in and having a meal and sharing in each other's company, which I think is wonderful to hear.
Really incredible. I mean, there was some great history. There were some folks who certainly knew the area very well and knew the history. In fact, there was one woman who was from the local Sarah Partridge Library just up the street, and she was telling a little of the history of the inn to me. And it started out as a stagecoach stop, and just as you described, before the big hotels, it was still a resort area. The resorts were at a different location. They were up on Moosalamu at Silver Lake.
Yeah.
And but up there, we think of that place as, oh, it's a place to hike and things like that. Well, back in the day, apparently there was a luxury resort up there. And so the Waybury Inn in its first incarnation was more of a stagecoach stop, a tavern in the sense of the definition of the word restaurant, where it's a restorative, and the weary traveler who'd been bounced around in the stagecoach would give anything just to have a soft place to sit, or to maybe get a night's sleep and maybe some food. So this is how the Waybury started out. And then it became, over time, I mean, certainly had to have been one of the first restaurants and places where people would go, you know, to celebrate, to get engaged, to have a wedding, to have a party, to gather after a funeral or what have you. And that history was really borne out. It's gone through several owners. The Suttons are the most recent, but when the Greens owned it, their daughter, Donna, is still the chef there. So that goes back at least 50 years. And of course, a lot of people who are under a certain age, and I guess people who are over a certain age too, know that was the setting for the exterior of the Newhart sitcom. And there are some kind of trappings, some sort of things that were used in the show. There's a sign for the inn that was used in the show, the Stratford Inn. And there's an autographed picture of Bob Newhart that sits behind the front desk. And I had actually interviewed Newhart many years ago on the radio when he was doing a concert appearance, and we talked a little bit about the inn. He didn't know it all that well. He had been a time or two, because they didn't really film the show in the inn. They just used the exterior. But there's some great stories. The Hollywood people wanted to paint it a different color, and of course they wanted to change the name. Mm-hmm. So the owners at the time said, sure, bring it on. And it was actually 30 years ago in 1990 that the show actually went off the air. So there's an even another milestone there. So a lot of history, but getting back to the constituencies, that's one constituency, the people who, you know, would be interested in coming. Oh yes, this was the place that was used in the exterior of Newhart. And then there's the people who have the affection, of course, as so many do, to come back to the area, whether it's done more in Middlebury or 1,000 other places to come and stay and vacation or ski. But then there's the people who live there, to whom this is really just a beloved landmark.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to shift now, if we can, to sort of COVID-19 and your daily routine of sort of, or monthly routine of coming up to Vermont, and sort of how the pandemic has affected that that aspect of your life.
Well, I mean, obviously before the middle of March, I was coming on a regular basis and staying for several days and broadcasting and making contacts and talking to the people that I talked to, as well as doing my radio broadcast. And then everything went upside down, and we had to switch to takeout. The inn closed for all intents and purposes, just closed for a short time, and then it was open for only takeout. And we were able to continue to get the word out that it was still operating and preparing food and things like that. But we had to change the whole tone of what of the inn's mission, because it changed from a place that offered lodging and food and dining and luxury and celebrations. All that was out the window. And now it was, we're putting food in bags, and we're putting food, in to-go containers. And I mean, we've got a 220-year-old or 210-year-old New England inn that now is a takeout place.
Yeah.
So it shifted everything. There were some very significant staff changes. Of course, you don't need chamber staff and housekeeping staff, and everyone pitched in to do everything. I mean, you had servers who were putting the air conditioners in when lodging was allowed back again, and the chef was going out and taking care of the garden and watering and things. So everyone pitched in the best sense of community in the inn, but it certainly was a huge change. I mean, that inn was pretty lonely for a few months from the middle of March until, oh gosh, whenever the restrictions got lifted, end of August, 1st of September, something like that. And then when lodging was first allowed back, it was for locals only, because you couldn't travel into the state. So it was just people who lived in the state that could come and stay. So there were a certain amount of people who actually went and stayed at the inn who had probably never stayed there before, which was kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm. So were you then so when you were broadcasting your radio shows, this was all from your home remotely?
What I would do is I would get the management and the chefs, and we would do a conference call and talk about what was going on, what were the dishes, what was the takeout, what were the hours. We were trying some different things like Sunday lunch, and when we were able to kind of go back out, we were trying to appeal to people who were motorcycle folks or classic car folks to come on and drive down Route 100 or drive over the gap on 125 and come down and have lunch. Just get lunch to go from the Waybury Inn. And so we were, trying to fit whatever we could, and to try to again stay upbeat, because everything was just so dire and so grim that we were trying to offer some kind of respite and some kind of refreshment, in the best sense. I guess going back to those old stagecoach days, I guess we were just trying to offer whatever comfort we could.
Mm-hmm. And what did you see as sort of the biggest challenge is moving to that remote sort of video conference calls and sort of trying to get and attract business? Well,
just that. We really didn't know, because we were getting enough business. It wasn't anywhere near the scale of business. The dining rooms weren't full. The takeout was a fraction of the food and beverage business, and thank goodness we had the to-go beverages. The cocktails to go saved everybody. But we didn't know how well we were reaching people, and if it was going to be the kind of a thing where people might have thought of the inn as being a kind of an upscale place and not some place that they would go to get a hamburger to go. Yeah. But they did. Mm-hmm. They did, and they started to have favorite dishes, and they would come back week after week. And so it started to get pretty popular, and it was we had to add on a couple of nights. Before, originally it was, 2 or 3 nights, and then we added on a fourth night, and then we were going into Sundays. And so it turned into a fairly decent uh, service that we were providing, and also the revenue was coming in the right direction.
Mhm. And would you say that these people that were coming in, and I guess it would depend on the time, were locals who were sort of just rediscovering the Wayberry, or maybe they were people traveling from out of state who were trying to get away from the city, who were trying to sort of get a breath of fresh air by coming up to Vermont with
Well,
low COVID
it's
cases?
interesting that it's interesting to consider that, because under the restrictions, there could only be locals. I mean, there was a time, and I don't ask me to pin it down because I just don't have the stats in front of me here, but from memory, it was probably from, well, the state shut down the middle of March. So from that point until sometime in May or so, maybe even June, there was nobody, and then locals could come out. And then by about, again, May or June, it was within state. So you could go, because Vermont did an exemplary job of keeping the cases down just by keeping everybody else out. And so you could have people traveling within the state. So you'd have people from Burlington, or from down in the Rutland area or somewhere like that, who would travel that far. And then as the lodging came back on a piecemeal basis, a very restricted basis, you had people who were able to, come up for an overnight from downstate or from upstate. But it was all local, all in-state. And in fact, at one point, when just before things started to open back up, kind of late in the summer, you had a couple of sort of refugees, if I can use that term, who had kind of sneaked in. And the staff noticed that there was an out-of-state car in the lot. And the people are inside, and the staff came up to them and said, "Look, you're not even supposed to be in Vermont, let alone be here at the inn." So, a couple of tense moments.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it was hard. I think that a lot of businesses wanted, local restaurants, they wanted that business and revenue. But, denying a customer because they weren't following the restrictions is sort of a whole nother discussion, where you might not want to be a restaurant that's found breaking the rules and being fear of potentially shut down.
Right. But I mean, it's like stealing food for your children. I mean, how do you, to deny a restaurateur or an innkeeper the opportunity? It's not even an opportunity, but to deny them the function that's basically part of the DNA of any good restaurateur or any good hotelier or innkeeper, to provide hospitality. I mean, you're going against those individuals' very nature. This is why they're in the business. They serve. They can't even define it, but this is how second nature it is. And as you say, to these restaurateurs, yeah, you don't want to get found in violation of the restrictions, but still, how can you send people away who came to you for food or for a night's rest?
It's difficult, and I think that's probably something that the restaurants and inns have probably struggled with during the pandemic. And as we continue to try and navigate those changes and those guidelines.
Very much so.
So shifting now to sort of a comparison between living and having the opportunity to live here in Vermont as well as Rhode Island, sort of the comparison between, or the sort of what you see as the advantage of a small county like Addison County during a global pandemic.
Well, it is the essence of being able to function in the best sense of community, and the fact that you do see that your actions do have an impact on others. Even in a small state like Rhode Island, which is smaller in geographic size but has more people. There's 1,700,000 people in the state of Rhode Island. And that said, it's a little difficult for government to get its arms around a population of that size. Rhode Island does not really have the county government structure. I mean, there are counties, but healthcare, social services, and infrastructure are not done on the county level in Rhode Island the way that they are in Vermont. And so you have the Madison County government that has a tremendous handle on the different constituencies. You've got the agriculture, you've got the education, you've got business, you've got commerce, and there's still a bit of manufacturing that goes on. And the county is able, in my view, is able to really keep a handle on that. Plus, there's a greater sense of identity and a sense of community if you live in the county. I mean, yes, you live in your town, you live in Bridport, or you live in Middlebury, but you also live in Madison County. And so that's real to you. And so you know people that live in the county and you have a particular kinship. It's different than, oh, I'm a fellow Vermonter. So I think that that dynamic really lent itself so much more to effective healthcare, public health, cooperation. Look, it's not a perfect system, but look what the county accomplished during the course of lockdown. I mean, in the town of Middlebury, they finished a railroad, for Pete's sake. You know?
That was impressive. That was very true. But yeah, I think that, certainly having, I was on campus, I was in school, and we were sort of confined to the county, and weren't leaving around the state. But it was really impressive, even during the pandemic, living in Madison County, seeing very low case numbers, and sort of seeing the community, especially as you said, the rail project, and sort of seeing the celebration that culminated in finishing sort of the main part of the project and connecting sort of the center of town and putting it back together, and seeing people sort of come together around that was special. All, of course, in the midst of a pandemic. But sort of in contrast, I'm curious if you see any sort of disadvantage to living in a small county, or maybe in the context of restaurants, if there's a disadvantage to running a business.
I don't know as I'd call it a disadvantage. To really be at a disadvantage, I think you'd have to pick up Madison County and put it somewhere else, because where there's so much available in the county in terms of the agriculture, in terms of the food supply, in terms of, and certainly we know so much more about food than we used to, but look at what we're able to access just within a very, very short stretch. I mean, you can find just about anything you need and would want in terms of food and beverages and so forth, from dairy to produce to meats and fish and anything that you might want or need. So I think to be at a disadvantage, I think you'd have to pick up the county and put it somewhere else where there was not that bounty of what's available. So, I mean, look, there are always disadvantages in terms of the quality or the level of service that might be available. And in terms of healthcare, sure, if there's some type of a severe illness, whether a pandemic comes under that, you may have to go elsewhere. You may have to go to Burlington or Boston or somewhere like that. But because of the economies of scale and because of the service levels of scale, the University of Vermont has its medical center, and Porter is now under that umbrella. Plus, you have the level of sophistication and the level of expectation at the college that kind of transcends, oh, we're just a rural county and we're here in simple folk and so forth. So I think the only disadvantage I could see would be that in terms of size, or in terms of the rural location, there might not be quite the level of service that you might have even in a place that's 40 miles up the road in Burlington, for example, where you do have a big city and so on. But certainly very few, and certainly the quality of life, and again, as I say, the sense of community and the cooperation that exists in the county and in the towns certainly outweighs any disadvantage, which is why a whole lot of people want to come and live here.
I think that's very true, and especially, I had a relative that was visiting from just outside of New York City, sort of early on in the pandemic, and we went for a bike ride, and he was saying how, we're so fortunate to have all this open space, and that, we weren't sort of cooped up and could really move around. And I think that sort of, plays into this rural, this idea that, being rural, we might not have those services as you alluded to, but there's certainly a lot that we could, be, there's a lot that we can be grateful for, when it comes to living in an area such as Addison County.
I think that's what came out of this for me, Eli, that just, again, going back to that fall morning, it was a beautiful fall morning, and that group of people were just so grateful. And, I had never been able to quantify it like that before in all of the time that I've been coming and staying and living and spending time and so forth. But there's this gratefulness. People don't go around and say it every day, but I think that there is this sense of gratefulness that people who live and who choose to live in the town and in the county really have.
Yeah, I think it's, I think that's a reflection of, being a small town and sort of, as in the area, specifically Addison County, where, people are always checking in on each other, and people are sort of, again, that sense of community, really looking out for each other. And I think that was heightened, on the, at the onset of the pandemic, and then, ever since moving forward.
Yep.
I would like to move now to sort of your take on the changes that will come or will likely come as a result of the pandemic, specifically in dining, and what you see as the changes that may or may not happen in restaurants and in inns, looking forward into the future.
That is a discussion that is ongoing in the restaurant industry for sure. And I think that we're right at a good point, being an inn. If I can, not that I speak for the inn, but I certainly represent the inn. But in terms of the intersection of lodging and restaurants, it really is going to be a very, very dynamic and a time of upheaval once we get past this pandemic. In terms of the lodging, first of all, some of the things that we've learned during this pandemic in terms of sanitation measures, in terms of cleaning, in terms of what should be the expectation level of the guest, I think that we will never go back to the level that we were before the pandemic. I think that there will likely be, particularly in the lodging industry, a standard. Perhaps it'll be a checklist. Perhaps it'll be membership. Perhaps it'll be the way that places get stars or diamonds or so forth. There may be that level of certification of sanitation and cleanliness measures, particularly in lodging, and the standard will have to be very, very high. In terms of restaurants, kind of the same thing. We will have to have an increased awareness, and we have an increased awareness of what happens when we touch and the consequences of touch, the consequences of not cleaning hands, the consequences of masking. I mean, I firmly believe that on some level, we're going to have to wear masks for the rest of our lives in certain settings. If there's a flu outbreak, if you go and visit someone in the hospital, that type of thing. So that, but we're now going to have this awareness and sensitivity of the consequences of our actions, even if it's being within 6 feet of someone and breathing on them. And so that's going to be at the forefront. I don't know what happens to buffets. I don't know what happens to tableside service. All of that is going to have to change. It may go to, it's interesting because at this breakfast, we couldn't have a buffet. We had to do stations. So the plate had to be given to the guest, and then the food placed on it. So you can't handle your own plate and give it to someone and have someone give it back to you. So I think the overall level of sanitation, cleanliness, the expectation of the guest has been heightened actually, and I don't think it goes back down. One thing I think that that'll be interesting to see is how much attention is paid now to price point. Because I think now we've at last got an understanding that there is a difference between the $8.99 all you can eat and the higher priced whatever. And so I'm not saying that price is never going to be an object. Money is always an object. But I think that there will be a greater acceptance of a difference in price point and a value for money. I think a perceived value for money, I think, will be much better understood by restaurant guests going forward.
Yeah, I think, at least from the times that I've gone out to eat, where there've been a buffet, for example, as you mentioned, and then at college, obviously, having the opportunity to serve ourselves and thinking about before how we sort of carried ourselves when it came to dining out, and how we'll have to a certain degree, maybe accept that those practices are just not going to happen again. We might not get that buffet because of having that experience living through a pandemic where, a highly touched surface maybe before wasn't, maybe some people batted an eye and, said, let's leave that be. But certainly now, with what we've learned from how diseases spread, and especially, going out to eat and all those touch surfaces, as we talked about, that's going to be a change. And I think it might be hard for some people to just, to not be able to go to that all you can eat buffet. But it certainly will definitely be a change.
I think everybody wants cocktails to go to stay, though.
Certainly, I think, at least I know some restaurants, that was critical, right? That was, to have that option for customers to take out, and, especially with bars, where their income is almost exclusive, they're making their money in terms of alcohol sales.
Well, it becomes a profitability question, quite frankly, because absent the high profit items such as alcohol and coffee, it's a business of pennies. Which brings up another point that isn't really discussed all that much, is that the unsustainable business practices that restaurants got caught at must change. And you're seeing it manifesting itself as a social statement, as somehow there should be vast societal change within the restaurant community. And all it is that there are practices that have gone on in the restaurant business on the supply side, on the employer side, and on the employee side that got exposed as a result of this pandemic, and we can't go back to them.
There'll certainly be some changes, I would have to imagine, within certainly the coming months, maybe even years, as we continue.
Yes, it'll be years.
As we continue to navigate our way through this pandemic. I want to sort of switch gears now and get your take on a COVID-19 vaccine, which has been in the news a lot. And I'm sure, and I'm wondering if you plan on getting the vaccine, if it becomes available, and what concerns you might have of that vaccine. What any sort of concerns if, in terms of getting the vaccine, any sort of.
Well, I'll tell you, I will most likely get the vaccine because of the line of work that I'm in, and so that I can continue to ply my trade, if you will. That said, I'm not a big shot guy. I haven't gotten a flu shot in I can't tell you how many years. I know I'm supposed to, but I just haven't, and whatever. I'm blessed with good health. I mean, I'm not even on medication and I'm no spring chicken, but I will probably take it. That said, it's going to be a very hard sell. I think that it's the health professionals, and I get a chance to interview them quite often. The health professionals and public health officials all agree that there has to be somewhere in the neighborhood of a 70% acceptability and a 70% vaccination rate for this thing to really work out. I don't know if you're going to get there anytime soon, because there are many, many, many people who are very reluctant to take this for a number of different reasons. Um, for I mean, if you research it and if you're up on it, you understand how it works, and it's really quite remarkable. But I think that, again, it raises other questions. Now, back to the restaurant business. Should restaurant staff be required to be vaccinated? Should it be a condition of employment? Can it be a condition of employment? Does your guest experience hinge on whether or not you've had the vaccine? Can we even ask those questions?
No, I think those are really good points to bring up, because it goes into the whole ethical practice of vaccination, and whether you can, compel someone to get vaccinated. That's, I think, a question that a lot of people are probably going to be, asking. And, there's going to be, concern, our businesses potentially, obviously people are not necessarily going to be sharing if they're vaccinated for COVID-19 or not. But
are you going to be able to do that though? That's another interesting point. Are you going to be, I mean, think about what we're requiring now in the state of Vermont. The fact of the matter is that, and the Waybury toes the line on this and is in complete compliance, that there is a declaration that has to be acknowledged to the state of Vermont that you have not traveled, you have quarantine, you've done this, you've done that. Is that going to be extended to, have you taken the vaccine? Can the state ask that? Should it?
I think, yeah, those are all, I'm like, really, yeah, those are all really good questions. And I think that, it's going to be challenging, because, is the COVID-19 vaccine going to be a regular vaccine, or is it going to be, a one-time sort of deal? Is it going to be sort of similar to a flu vaccination where we get it yearly? And of course, what are people's comfortability, comfort levels going to be? Are they going to, even with a vaccine, are people going to want to go out to a restaurant? Are they going to want to do takeout? I guess that sort of brings up another question, which you might be able to allude to, is, do you think restaurants, now that they have sort of invested themselves in these takeout businesses, do you think these takeout businesses will persist, or will there be some sort of reeling back and focusing on dine-in experiences when it's...
I do. And if we had been having this conversation in June or July, I would have answered differently. But it's remarkable how these businesses have pivoted and how the supply chain has pivoted. You've had just an accelerated rate of evolution of packaging, of technique, and even of preparation of food, so that the whole takeout experience is completely different. I work with a group of restaurants all over New England, and it's incredible to see how they've changed their takeout offerings, how they've changed the way that they prepare these foods. Some foods, quite frankly, don't travel well. And so the savvy restaurateurs have said, okay, we're gonna change our packaging, or we're gonna change the way that we cook something. It's gonna be cooked differently if we take it out, if we make it for takeout. The packaging that this food is traveling in has become much more environmentally proper. So that we don't have the styrofoam boxes and any of that stuff, which was going to happen, which was bound to happen. The technology was there. It was always cost prohibitive. But all of a sudden now pandemic shows up, and these supply houses are saying, okay, if we want to keep this restaurant's business, we better sell this environmentally friendly takeout material at the same price that we were selling the styrofoam. So that has happened. So yes, I think that the takeout, and I think that's part of what we were talking about before. How is the restaurant business going to change in the next 5 or 10 years or longer? And I think that restaurants that wouldn't have dreamed of doing takeout are going to stay in the takeout business.
And I think, especially given, the sort of supply chains that you've mentioned, in terms of, I think of where we live in Madison County, and it's farm to table. I'm like, it's so easy to go and get those, those local ingredients that restaurants want to incorporate into their menus. And I'm curious if, for those ingredients that they haven't, been able to get because of travel restrictions or lengthy shipping times, whether, maybe that's influenced restaurants' menus, or maybe they've really focused on sourcing more food locally as opposed to from a a big supplier.
I think that's a good point, and I think you're right. And we don't have to look really much further than our northern border, because we were importing we were importing a lot of preparation, seasonings, those kind of things. The Nutella that comes from Canada is different than the Nutella that's made around here. So I think that, yes, there has been an adaptation, and yeah, for better or for worse, and for mostly it's been better. I think people have, restaurateurs and chefs and people around here have found that, what we make around here is pretty good. Let's stick with it.
Yeah, no, I think that our local food, and especially when you use locally sourced ingredients, is something that you can't beat. And I think we're fortunate to have those local farms that produce really great ingredients that restaurants can incorporate into their menus. And as sort of the final question, I'm curious is, your involvement in the restaurant industry, what you think the best food for takeout is, or the food that travels the best, that whether you eat it in a restaurant or eat it at home, there's no difference. It tastes just as good.
You know what? Keep it simple. Burgers always do well. Grill the bun so it doesn't get too soggy. Fries are a little iffy. It's catch as catch can. Sometimes you're good with it, but the burger travels very, very well. And who was doing takeout before anybody, and it was always good? Chinese food. Asian, right? Whether it was the way it was prepared, you always got it home. It was always hot. It was always great, and so we can definitely take a lesson from that sector.
I would say that I've taken food out from a variety of local restaurants, and I think that I have learned that some definitely does not travel that well. But certainly, I've gone to Sabai in town.
Yep.
I've gone to Taste of India. I've gone to the Arcadian.
Oh, Indian food travels well. Yes.
And we've done takeout as a family from there. So we've tried to get around and get a little bit from every restaurant here and there. But that's all the questions I have for you. I want to thank you for taking valuable time to do this interview. And I'm sure that those who watch will gain a lot from learning about your experience, but also the experience of dining during COVID-19 and sort of, the struggles and sort of how businesses and, specifically restaurants and inns have sort of tackled this problem of, how do we still put on a great meal for our diners or our guests at the inn while following these guidelines, and sort of how that may look moving forward.
Well, the thing that we really knew and that really didn't get voice until all of a sudden it was in front of us, the restaurants are our food supply. Keep in mind, we have a whole generation, maybe two, that never learned to cook. So this is nothing short of our food supply. We need our restaurants, but our restaurants need us. It's like the old sign in front of the restaurant: eat here or we both starve. I mean, that really is it. And heading into this gift time of year, and perhaps more restrictions for a few months, a way that restaurants could be supported is by the purchase of gift cards and merchandise. Perhaps if, in the case of a place like the Inn or some other large-scale venue, if perhaps there was going to be a company holiday party that was going to be scheduled, maybe have the thought in mind of giving the employees a gift card from that place, and just keep the restaurant going. I think that it's a matter of months before we see the other side of this, and if we can just hang on. But it's been a great pleasure to talk to you, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. I appreciate it as well. And I wish you the best as we approach the new year, and hopefully we'll be dining back in restaurants and returning to somewhat normal eating out culture.
You bet. All right, Eli. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you as well. You take care.